Capitol. In fact, they went all the way back. If you look at the whole presentation, they went all the way back to Charlottesville and beyond. But in terms of this particular presentation, and looking at Stacey Plaskett and what she did, the absolutely brilliant thing that they did is they showed exactly where everyone was at the time that these individual rioters came into the building. And the reason why that was important, well, is because they had to show in some way what the danger was. Everybody's been saying, okay, well, not everyone, but many people have been saying, okay, well, it looks like they were here and the Congress was here and the rioters were there. Well, now we see the proximity. And in some of those videos, you could see Chuck Schumer just barely missing the rioters. You could see Mitt Romney just barely missing the rioters. And it really brought home just how grave this situation was.
Well, it really demonstrated the proximity to death that many members of the House and Senate were that day. And I thought it was a stroke of genius for the Democrats to use Mike Pence as the symbol of what could have happened. They used him to show that the president didn't care about his own vice president. His own vice president's life and his vice president's family's life was placed in danger, and the president showed no concern. Never contacted the vice president at all during the siege on the Capitol. And the fact that you had two constitutional officers who were in a line of succession to the presidency, whose lives were in danger, the vice president and the Speaker of the House, shows you the callous disregard that Trump had for the democracy, because he didn't care. All he wanted to do was to stop the certification of that vote by any means necessary. And the means that we know now were violent means. Those folks did not break into the Capitol to have a peaceful protest. They broke into the Capitol to harm, injure, or kill, do whatever was necessary to, as they put it, stop the steal.
And you know what? It's not a stretch. It's not a stretch, because those were their own words. They were talking about injuring and killing these people. And I always tell people, people were saying, well, I don't think that would have happened. But what do you think they actually went there to do? You think they were going to have a conversation with Nancy Pelosi and then leave with their identities being known to everyone? No, they were going to do damage. And that was the point of this whole thing. And one more thing, you were talking about Mike Pence. I think Mike Pence has got to be probably the happiest man to come out of this, because in one single day, the Democrats have done what I think no one else would be able to do, which is to fully rehabilitate Mike Pence as a constitutional officer. They talked about how patriotic he was and how he fulfilled his duty. And in a number of ways, I know a lot of Democrats had to be holding their nose in order to be able to do that.
Oh, absolutely. But think of the way Mike Pence played this. After the election, Mike Pence was really quiet while Trump was rambling on about a fraud. And as it got closer to the inauguration, it was Pence who informed Trump that he was obligated to perform his constitutional duty and that he could only do that duty and nothing else. And it was Mike Pence who showed up on Inauguration Day to wish the incoming president and vice president well. So Mike Pence, in a stretch of 4.5 weeks, was able to basically erase his complicity during the Trump presidency, which is amazing. But, it just goes to show you, I think what these videos really did for people watching is it put this trial not into the context of the trial of Donald Trump, but this is really about the people versus the Republican Party of America. Yeah. This is about an entire party that facilitated the madness of January 6th, that put their own lives in danger. And whether or not these Republican senators want to admit that, the video evidence is clear. Anytime you see a mob that's willing to fight armed police officers, they're willing to go toe-to-toe to crush a police officer in a door, to beat a police officer with a hockey stick and an American flag. The only thing these people were concerned was, by any means necessary, we're going to stop this count. If that means we're going to have to kill a police officer or a member of Congress, that's what we're willing to do. And that tone was set by Donald Trump at that rally. Donald Trump said, were going to the Capitol and, like the liar he is, and said, I'm going to lead you there. But what did he do? He went back to the White House to take glee in what was going on at the Capitol. So, I think that this trial is revealing the depths of deception
Yeah.
of Donald Trump. And, I think it's why you had Senator Bill Cassidy early on when it came time to the question of whether they should proceed with this trial. I think there are some Republicans who are looking at this, and they may not be thinking in terms of sort of a high ethical bar. I think some of them are looking through a purely political lens, that at some point I'm going to seek reelection, and this vote is going to be public. And so there are certain standards on which I have run in the past, certain standards that the Republican Party purports to support, such as law and order and patriotism to the flag. Those issues have been wiped away as Republican standards because of this siege. You can no longer claim the Republican Party stands for law and order when you saw these mobs cursing at officers, beating officers. And you can no longer say they're patriotic when you saw the manner in which they treated the American flag during this siege. So I think, while I do not think Donald Trump will be convicted, I do believe that there will be more Republican votes for conviction than we previously thought would happen, because I think the evidence has been so powerful that there will be a few Republicans in that Senate that say, you know what, I at least want to be on the right side of history. And I'll take my beating out there in the public domain by these Trump supporters, but I don't want my name to go down on the wrong side on this when there's so much evidence. It'd be one thing if we were just talking about written testimony or oral testimony, but this video testimony and evidence is so powerful, where you even had one other brilliant thing they did. They had folks who were part of the mob on video saying why they came, right?
Yeah.
We came because of Donald Trump.
Yeah, there's no mystery as to why those people came.
And so, I think,
good.
No. I think part of what, we're seeing, of course, the unraveling of the lie. And interesting enough, today, the other news broke that Donald Trump was actually in grave danger from COVID-19, that they thought he would have to be put on a ventilator. So the New York Times broke that story this afternoon. So when you look at the Trump presidency, it was one huge lie. And it was about preserving power. And he convinced his supporters, and this is where the Democrats really laid out their case in a very efficient and effective way. When they started talking about, look at his words months before the election, where he's saying it's going to be the most rigged election in history, that the only way that I can lose is if they rig the election. That drumbeat kept on and on. And look, he was aided in that. He was aided in that by conservative cable news channels. He was aided in that by folks like Rudy Giuliani. And so there was the strategy early on. And more as I think about it, I really believe that going into the election, they knew they were going to lose. I think they saw the COVID debacle, and they knew that the polls were showing widespread disapproval of his handling of COVID-19. And I think they decided, well, if we're going to lose, we have to have a strategy that we can claim we were cheated. And so January 6th, in my mind, was just part of their campaign strategy.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
I would agree with you there. Within the stretch of, I guess, 24 hours, we saw probably some of the worst lawyering that I've ever seen, and I've practiced for more than 35 years, and some of the best lawyering presentations that I have ever seen, and I've practiced for 35 years. And I think it's important for everyone to understand exactly what they're seeing here. There were two incredible stars. There were more than two incredible stars, but two that I want to point out because America really had not seen them on that stage. The first is Joe Neguse from Colorado. Now, this is a young 36-year-old young man who stood up before the entire world And he handled that case like he was Clarence Darrow. I mean, his presentation was so seasoned, so direct, and so clear that I found myself as a seasoned lawyer riveted to what he was saying. And what I think is important here is it is not just what the substance is that you have to say. It is how you present that substance. And we learned that because of the prior proceeding, the prior impeachment. They had trouble getting their point across. Now, it was different subject matter, but they had a lot of trouble. But the way that they handled this, particularly the way that Joe Neguse handled this, that interspersing of video and conversation and pointing out exactly what the video shows instead of just putting it up there, that was absolutely brilliant. The same thing with Stacey Plaskett. I mean, the presentation that she made, and I have always argued that African-American women have a very special talent when it comes to being able to make presentations in a legal sense. And she showed it definitely as she was moving forward. The good thing about them is they had a strategy and they stuck to it. Whether it started with Jamie Raskin from the very beginning, laying out what everyone would do, and then going on to various areas, and they stuck to what they said they would prove. And I think it's really critical for us to recognize that, as you said, they're not going to get, it's unlikely that they are going to get the Republicans in any way to say, okay, we relent, we get it, we give, he's going to be impeached. That's not going to happen. But the American people are really the judges here. They're really the triers of the fact. And those of us who are watching, how could you not be persuaded? How could you not be persuaded that this was a horrible event? But number two, how could you not be persuaded that it was the president of the United States that bore responsibility? There was a really incredible analogy that was given by Raskin. And he talked about Donald Trump was analogous to the fire chief that goes into the theater and yells fire. And the reason why that's really important is, as the president, people will argue, oh, there's a First Amendment right to say this, First Amendment right to say that. But you also have to consider, aside from the right that you have, it is the obligation that you have that goes with that right. And Donald Trump, as the chief executive of this country, had a different obligation and stood in a different position, so that his words carried so much more than if you and I stood up and talked about a big lie on elections. He is the chief executive.
And I think Raskin even said, the analogy was setting the fire, not just saying there's a fire in the theater, but basically setting the fire and then sitting back and watching the fire and not providing aid to put out the fire, right? Yeah. And so that truly was an apt description of what Trump did on that day. And, I think the other thing with the two members of the House impeachment team that you referenced, Delegate Plaskett and Representative Neguse, is that symbolically their presence was really important. So you had Representative Neguse, who, child of immigrants, right, who made his way and has become a successful member of the United States House of Representatives. Then you had Delegate Plaskett, who can't vote in the House of Representatives, right? Representing a U.S. territory that has no voting rights. And to me, that was such a powerful symbol of the potential of our democracy and the downside of democracy.
The unfulfilled promise, right?
Unfulfilled promise, right? The goose is the potential of the democracy, and Delegate Plaskett is the unfulfilled promise of the democracy. And to include those two as impeachment managers, I think was a stroke of genius, because I think you are absolutely right. Even though the Senate serves as the jury, technically as the jury in this trial, it's the court of public opinion that's going to matter in the end. And I think in a court of public opinion, the Republican Party will be found guilty of being complicit with Donald Trump's attempt to overthrow the election. And that's going to have some long-term consequences, because while we always frame it as Democrats versus Republicans, probably the key voting bloc in this country are independent voters. And so independent voters are watching this and saying, whoa, so this is the direction of the Republican Party. I'm not going to give them my support going forward if this is what they stand for. Independent voters have a tendency to sway statewide and national elections.
Right.
And so I think the Republican Party has put itself in a corner because now you've embraced Trumpism to the point that you can't even publicly acknowledge a wrong, a glaring wrong, because now you're so entangled. You know, you talk about entanglements. Now you're so entangled with this extreme racist right wing of the party that you can't divorce yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no divorce that can be given. So now you have all of these Republicans, whether it's Ted Cruz, you know, whether it's Castro, you have all of these Republicans who have sold their soul to Donald Trump. And I don't think there's any way they can come back from that. I think the Republican Party is either going to have to implode or it's going to have to split, with those Republicans who don't want to be a part of this madness forming a new party.
And the interesting thing is, you know, those old style conservative Republicans, they're almost like an abused spouse. You know, they've got the QAnon radical right Republicans who are standing up and doing all kinds of crazy things and just abusing them.
Mm-hmm.
But they can't get out of the relationship.
Right.
They're stuck in it and they don't know how to get out because they have really nowhere to go. And part of the problem is they're going to have to make the decision, just like an abused spouse, to leave the relationship. Mm-hmm. And that's what I see as the only solution for the Republican Party at this point.
Oh, absolutely. They are exhibiting tendencies of a battered spouse. And, you know, unless someone builds a safe house for them, and a safe house might be a new party, they're going to continue to be battered because they cannot find it within themselves to free themselves from Donald Trump. And so when you look at, you know, you really have to go back now 5 years and think about the Republican primary. Yeah. When Donald Trump was on stage with all of these establishment Republicans, he was crazy then. He had said some crazy things leading up to declaring himself a candidate. And you had these seasoned Republicans, Jeb Bush, you know, you had all of these folks, and they could not find a way to kill off Donald Trump during the primary. And once he survived that primary, it was over for the Republican Party because Donald Trump never had any intention of being a Republican. It was all about Donald Trump. He could care less about the Republican brand. In fact, I really think his purpose here is to kill the Republican brand so that he can create his own party. I don't think I don't think Donald Trump has any interest in being a Republican. I think Donald Trump has an interest in saving himself and enriching himself and his family. And so if that means sacrificing the Republican Party, which he is obviously doing, then so be it. And unfortunately, as you said, like a battered spouse, the Republicans in the House and Senate are captive. And there are only a few brave ones, and they spoke up in the House when they voted for his impeachment, and they spoke up in the Senate when they voted for the trial to proceed. So we're going to see, you know, probably by this weekend, what the results will be from this trial. And we'll certainly come back and talk about it and talk about the ramifications, and particularly talk about what's next as we move forward, because certainly with the ending of the trial, it does not end the saga of Donald Trump. There are other issues to still be resolved, legal matters to still be resolved, that could cause Donald Trump some grave concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to make a prediction. If he is acquitted, which I think he will be, it won't be the end of Donald Trump, but just as he said himself, it will be the beginning of a different Donald Trump, you know, pretty much the same Donald Trump, but a new Donald Trump who will feel revived and will make his presence known within the Republican Party. And they will be very sorry, I believe, for the monster that they created.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the old-fashioned Frankenstein movies. you know, where Dr. Frankenstein was excited in the beginning about creating the monster until the monster turned on him.
Jacked him up.
And it was a whole nother story. So,
Yep.
you know, sometimes you learn the hard way.
Mhm.
And I think the Republican Party is learning the hard way about this monster they created. So we'll see, and we'll be back, and we will discuss more in terms of what is going to be the future of the Republican Party and really the implications for the Biden administration going forward.